In fact, as requested, I am here to speak about the review or the roundup on civil service topics. I am Kumar Supraveen. I had been Haryana cadre IAS officer of 99 batch. In the review or the civil services roundup, I would like to take up the topic which would help the students in preparation for the IAS and allied exams. And this time I desire to take up the historical, political and economic perspectives of the Russia-Ukraine war. What is the historical background which has led to this kind of a supreme level of animosity which has led to the war? So first we will get into the historical perspectives, breakup of the Soviet Socialist Republic, the expansion of the NATO, that means the things which led to this kind of a situation due to the Cold War politics and what happened beyond that. We will also try to understand the whole situation through the geographical location, the geopolitical locations of these countries, the countries around Ukraine. We will then try to look into the objective of Russia in conducting this war and what led to those things. What has been the stand of the other countries, the stand of the US and its allies, stand of India, stand of other countries. Finally, we would like to also touch upon the concepts of human corridor, humanitarian corridor and no-fly zone. This part may also help the students in terms of the short questions that may be asked with respect to no-fly zone or the air exclusion zone or the human corridor. So, if we look at the historical perspective, then after the Second World War, in fact, even before the Second World War, when the USSR came as an existential entity, in fact, going right back up to early 1900s, when the Soviet Union started coming into existence after the Russian war, and in which the Bolsheviks had overthrown the Tsars of Russia. At that time in the Ukraine there was a nationalist government, but the Bolsheviks, actually at that time Khrushchev, who was the third president of the USSR, he was basically Ukrainian and he was a important member of the Bolshevik party, and the Bolshevik party could overthrow the nationalist government there, and then the Ukraine became a part of the USSR. So that is the first time that the Ukraine basically becomes a part of the Soviet Socialist Republic. After that, when the World War II ensued during 1939 to 1945, then till Ukraine was with USSR, and lot of nuclear and other conventional arsenals were also there in the Ukrainian zone or in the country, in the Ukrainian country, areas surrounded, basically under Ukraine. In fact, just after the Second World War, the Cold War started in the form of basically there was a beginning of the NATO countries. In 1949, 12 countries became a part of the NATO, which essentially comprised of US, Canada and Western European countries like France, England, Luxembourg, Denmark and so on. But this was followed by the further eastward expansion of NATO because in 1955 West Germany became a part of NATO. And the Cold War was continuing, and when the Russian Union broke up in 1991, and the Russian Union also broke up despite the then president of USSR, Mr. Mikhail Gorbachev, not wanting it, and somehow he wanted to have a loose federation continuing. But the Russian Federation actually broke up, and new countries like Ukraine, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Armenian, Georgia, and so on and so forth came into existence. At that time, there is a history associated with it, why Russia is specifically targeting Ukraine and not other countries which were a part of its erstwhile federation. When between 91 to 1996, when basically Ukraine was becoming a new country, the Russians were very particular about the fact that the nuclear and other conventional arsenal which are there in Ukraine, they should not actually become so much a part of a Ukraine, because many of the controls that these weapons had, they were with Russia. So Russia wanted to keep control, because Russia did not, at that time itself, did not want Ukraine to be a very strongly militarized state. And when there was a strong level of discussion between the NATO countries and Russia, just subsequent to the disintegration of USSR, that what should be the status of Ukraine. And at that time, Russia was agreeable to the independence of Ukraine, basically on the condition that it will be a non-nuclear state, it will be a sort of a demilitarized state. And Ukraine also agreed to this in lieu of its independence. So for 20 years, basically all these things rounded up between 1996 to 2001. And since then, almost till 20 years, Ukraine has been a model, and it was also praised as a good model of how a non-nuclear country can basically progress leaps and bounds. And because Ukraine's GDP for the large part of these last 20 years grew at very good rates. However, as we were taking the discussion through NATO was basically formed as an alliance to contain the influence of USSR, because at that time USSR had entered into a Warsaw Pact with many of the satellite countries like Poland, Belarus, and so on and so forth. But the Warsaw Pact also ended with the disintegration of the USSR. So technically speaking, since the Cold War also had come to an end, there was not so much of a need of NATO. But NATO further expanded. And since it was conceived, it was believed by the US and allied countries that since Russia has become less powerful after the disintegration of USSR, therefore, basically now the world was moving towards a more of a unipolar world led by USA, and there was a further expansion of NATO, because now Poland also became a part of NATO in 99, if I am correct, and then Montenegro also became in the early 2000s. So there was further expansion going on for NATO, and this actually alarmed Russia very much. So this is where because Putin came into power in the 2000s, and he became very alarmed, and his almost one of the first statements that the greatest mistake of the 20th century was disintegration of the USSR. So this also serves as serves us to look into the mind of Putin, that he was basically little alarmed in his mind about the disintegration of Russian supremacy. And therefore, as early as 2007, in fact, in 2002, America unilaterally withdrew itself from an important missile treaty, anti-ballistic missile treaty. So, in fact, in 2004, Putin warned the world that this is not doing, because America cannot consider itself as above international law, that it can unilaterally withdraw itself from the anti-ballistic missile treaty. However, the Western powers did not give much weightage to what Russia was saying, because Russia was considered as being weak. But Putin had a desire to resurrect Russia in his beliefs, in his dreams, and he basically then in 2014 he annexed Crimea. So Crimea is, if we now before getting a little more into it, first of all let me just explain the geographical map of Ukraine. That will also make the things clear. Ukraine is, if you remember the map of Madhya Pradesh in India, Ukraine's map is somewhat similar to that in its geographical shape. So almost the two dimensions, the north to south dimension and east to west dimensions, are almost of the same distance. Now, to the south of Ukraine is the Black Sea. And all the area around the Black Sea is very, very fertile. It's called the bread basket of the world. We'll further come into this when we talk about the economic aspects of this war. To the north of Ukraine is Russia, the Russian Federation. To the east of Ukraine is again Russian Federation. To the west of Ukraine, starting from southwards to northwards, to the west of Ukraine you have Romania. Just to the north of Romania and to the west of Ukraine you have Hungary. Then you have Slovakia, and then you have Poland. And then to the north of Ukraine there is Belarus. So this is how the Ukraine is surrounded. So Ukraine is basically a could have been landlocked country except for the Black Sea, because to the south of Ukraine there is a Black Sea. And almost to the center of the Ukraine flows a river called Dnieper River, which originates in Belarus. So, and the capital of Ukraine is Kyiv, which is on the banks of Dnieper River. Other towns also, like the nuclear power plant which has also been captured by Russia, Zaporizhzhia, is also on the bank of Kyiv. So this basically river empties itself into the Black Sea. Now, when coming back to our discussion, when in 2014 Crimea was annexed by Ukraine, and what supported Russia to attack Crimea is that there is a large ethnic Russian population in Crimea. And basically, since Ukraine has been an eyesore for the Russian Federation, because it is exactly at the boundary of Russia, and Russia does not want it to go the NATO way. But Ukraine has time and again expressed its desire to become a part of NATO, which to Russia seems that the NATO and its arsenal, warheads, will be at the doorsteps of Russia, which Russia strongly basically strongly rejects, doesn't want that to happen by any means. So Crimea was annexed in 2014. In fact, the admiral of the Ukrainian government, actually he changed his sides and became actually became a part of Russian thing, and basically that made the annexation all the more easy. And subsequent to that the Crimean Parliament was replaced, the as it is called Supreme Council, and then there was a decision by the Parliament that it will be a part of Russian Federation. A treaty was signed, and subsequently it became a part of Russia according to that treaty. But then the Western and other allies became very much annoyed, and Russia was expelled out, basically suspended from the G8 countries, Group 8 countries. After Crimea, now in 2022, when there was a large build-up of Russian forces in Belarus and in eastern part of Ukraine, or the western part of Russia. So this all gave a strong hint that there would be an attack on Ukraine. Putin repeatedly was demanding that Ukraine should not try to be a NATO country. It should not look towards West. But that is what exactly happened by the Ukrainian President, Mr. Zelensky, and that brought the things to the boil, and ultimately Ukraine was attacked on 24th February 2022, just 12 days back. Now, if we look at the kind of war that is going on, the Russians are by far superior compared to, in terms of their warheads and arsenal, compared to Ukraine. And although Ukraine also possesses some of the Soviet era warheads and missiles, they have short range ballistic missiles, but traditionally, since many years, since Soviet Russia has accumulated a large arsenal, and even though after the disintegration of USSR, the number of arsenal were reduced, but still they are quite a lot for Ukraine to survive. They have Iskander missiles, they have cruiser missiles, they have multiple rockets, they have many of the warheads which basically have they have the capacity to multi-target, because those bombs will basically divide into bomblets, and they will at the same time they will be able to strike many targets. So, but the point that has favored Ukraine all this while is that there is strong determination to resist. And with that strong determination to resist, although Russia might have expected Kyiv, their capital, to be captured within 4 or 5 days, still they are only at the outskirts of their capital. And as far as the southern port cities are concerned, Russia's intention, as I was explaining in the map, that in the south of Ukraine there is a Black Sea, and that is the only access of Ukraine towards the international water boundaries. Here, the Russians were able to conduct amphibious attacks, and since they already have Crimea, which is to the south of Ukraine, with them, that all the more helped them. So they have practically encircled the cities like Mariupol, which is a seaport city. Kherson is another seaport city, which also has been practically captured. So Russian want to completely capture that southern zone so that their contact with the Black Sea is curtailed. Now, time and again, the Russian foreign minister has declared that they don't want to capture Ukraine, but they want them to agree to certain basic conditions. And according to that, their basic condition is that, number one, the Western countries should recognize Crimea as a part of Russian Federation, which was annexed in 2014. The second basic condition that they want is that NATO should not progress towards east, neither should Ukraine join the NATO. Third basic condition they want is that Ukraine should be demilitarized and the weapons that Ukraine has, they should disclose it to Russia. However, the President Zelensky, the President of Ukraine, has basically kept on requesting the Western countries, USA and other allies, to provide weapons to it, to provide other warhead support to it. Now, since the war is not ending, but there is a great amount of humanitarian crisis, therefore, there is much talk of the human corridor. Now, before getting into this human corridor, let us also look into the diplomatic stands taken by the different countries. The whole thing which has been heavily criticized is being led by the United States of America. It is supported by UK, United Kingdom, France, Germany and others. In fact, a lot of economic sanctions have been put against Russia, including imports from Russia to other countries, ban on imports, including ban on travel of many important personalities of Russia, which includes Putin, which includes his foreign minister, Mr. Lavrov. Ban on the financial transactions because the SWIFT transaction has been closed for Russia. One question that is very much being talked about, that how long will Russia survive with these economic bans? But Russia has not deterred itself. And how strong is the Russian economy to survive this all economic sanctions is something to be seen. The USA tries to muster up support from all the countries to give a strong message against Russia, or a strong message to Russia to desist from continuing with its war. In the UN Security Council meeting, China abstained. India also abstained from voting. 3 countries and Russia vetoed that resolution. This was followed by UN General Assembly meeting in which India again abstained. Another country which was there to abstain was Saudi Arabia in UN Security Council, but in General Assembly meeting it actually favored that vote against Russia. In fact, the countries which have been supportive or semi-supportive of Russia are India, Iran, North Korea, China, Venezuela. So roughly 10-12 countries are supportive of Russia. But the key question is that how long will the war continue? Most recently, the Israeli Prime Minister Naftali has visited Russia. In fact, he was the second head of a state who has visited Russia, and basically the Putin administration has seemed to be toned down a little bit after his visit, because Israel has tactically kept its diplomatic ties intact with Russia by not too much criticizing Russia for its war. India is specifically concerned about its own citizens, who are a number of medical students and other students who are studying in that country. Roughly 14,000 have been evacuated, but many more needs to be evacuated, and they are waiting for evacuation. And India wants to keep a delicate balance in its foreign relationship, both with Ukraine and with Russia, and even with United States. So, although in face of immense pressure from US, India has tried to maintain a neutral stand, which has been in par or consonance with its traditional policy of non-aligned approach in its foreign policy. So India doesn't want to be taking sides, and besides there is also an issue of national interest, because Russia had all along been supportive of India for past 70 years. So the war is continuing. The war can end only in 2-3 ways. One way is that if Ukraine actually agrees to be non-NATO state, agrees to be a state which doesn't aspire for a lot of military or becoming a military power. The second scenario in which the war can stop is that the economic sanctions against Russia become too hard for it to bear. The third way is the diplomatic channel, which India has been advocating and which of late Israel has also taken, is that somehow convince Putin to come to a middle or balancing position where certain of its demands are met, and certain of the concerns of Ukraine are also taken care of. Finally, just to discuss about the two topics which I had said about the human corridor and the no-fly zone. What is a human corridor? A human corridor during the war times, it's a temporary ceasefire. When you, for a particular area and for a particular time, you agree to not withhold your attacks, and basically you define a particular zone through which the humans can get evacuated. I mean, the people who want to be evacuated, they are able to get evacuated. The governments which want to evacuate their people, they also can evacuate their people by peaceful means. For example, India is trying to evacuate its students from Sumy, from Kharkiv. So if there is a human corridor created in Sumy and Kharkiv and even Mariupol, then students and other people who want to go to their countries, either through the Russian border or in some cases through the western borders, they can actually do so. In fact, the other thing which I wanted to discuss was no-fly zone. The no-fly zone basically means it's an air exclusion zone. So, if the flying of any aircraft is banned into a particular zone, particular area then that area is demarcated as no-fly zone. It may occur at the individual country's decision level, or it may have the sanction of the United Nations Organization, UNO. In the past, no-fly zones were created during the Persian Gulf War in 1991. Basically, that was the longest time that the no-fly zone was continued, from 1991 to 2003. Two no-fly zones were created in the northern Iraq and the southern Iraq, because at that time it was alleged that Saddam Hussein, the then administration of Saddam Hussein had bombarded the Kurdish people in the northern Iraq, and to contain that, United States of America, France and Great Britain, they had created a no-fly zone in the northern Iraq, and also they did the same thing in southern Iraq, because there was again an alleged attack on the Shia population of Iraq. But in these, although the purpose of the no-fly zone is to contain illegal attacks, but just in order to contain those illegal attacks, sometimes it was alleged that even these countries like USA, France and Britain, when they counter-attacked, then there was a damage to the civilian population, many people also died. The second no-fly zone that was created was in Bosnia-Herzegovina, that was in 1993 to 1995. And of late, the third no-fly zone was created in Libya in 2011. Now, what is so special about the no-fly zone that is being so much talked about in the Russia-Ukraine war? President Zelensky of Ukraine, he wants that the NATO forces should declare a no-fly zone over Ukraine, so that the Russian airplanes do not attack them. But this is being severely resisted or denounced by Russia, by saying that if the NATO forces create a no-fly zone, then it would be understood that those countries, NATO countries, are at war with Russia. So then Russia would be free to attack the NATO countries. But then that can escalate into nuclear warfare, nuclear showdown, because Russia has a lot of nuclear arsenal, and NATO does not want to provoke Russia to such an extent that the war becomes nuclear, and that will actually create a doomsdown for the world. So basically, the NATO countries also want that the war should be contained within Russia, and it should be contained within Ukraine and ended within Ukraine. So this time, one of the strong reasons why the no-fly zone NATO countries are not interested in creating is because of the nuclear power of Russia. Because in earlier no-fly zones, be it Iraq, be it Libya, so in those cases, the no-fly zone could be created, because there was no nuclear fear. But this time, there is a fear that it may go nuclear, and therefore there is NATO countries are not interested in creating a no-fly zone. So this is all for today, and let us hope that the war ends at a mutually agreeable terms, so that there is a lasting peace in the world. Thank you so much.